The sun was hot above the cabin, beating down on the dry, cracked land. Inside, the air was thick with pain. His wife screamed, once, then silence. The midwife came out slowly, her apron stained deep red. In her arms was a tiny baby girl, barely breathing, her cry soft like a bird's. He didn't move. He just stared at her. His hands hung useless by his sides. When they handed him the child, he didn't know what to do. His wife lay still inside, her skin pale and still. The baby wriggled in his arms, so small, so light. His heart felt heavy. His mind was blank. The funeral was quiet. Just the preacher, some dry wind, and him. He stood there holding the baby, hands trembling, eyes swollen but dry. No one came. No one offered a word. He buried his wife beneath the oak tree, wrapped the child tighter, and left. A day later, his boots crunched on the dusty road into town. He hadn't spoken since the birth. At the trading post, he stopped. There was a woman standing alone near a wagon. She had a soft face and eyes that looked like they knew loss. He stepped forward, arms out, and offered the baby. The woman didn't flinch. She looked at the child, touched the blanket gently, and after a long moment, she whispered, "She's mine now." He stood there frozen, heart thudding, lips parted, but no words came. The wind blew dust between them. She turned away, cradling the baby to her chest, and walked off slow and sure. He didn't follow. He just stood, staring, empty arms hanging at his sides. The room above the saloon was hot and smelled of spilled beer and dust. Josiah sat near the window, staring out at the still street below. Nights were loud, filled with the clink of glass and piano keys. But inside his room, it was quiet. Too quiet. He lit no lamp, drank in the dark, and didn't speak unless someone forced him to. The bed was stiff. The floor creaked under every step. He paid for the room in cash, didn't say how long he'd stay. The bartender only nodded. Everyone in town had seen him at the funeral, standing alone with that baby in his arms. And then, just as quick, they'd seen him give her away. People whispered. They always did. At night, Josiah drank alone. His fingers wrapped around the glass, not tight, just barely holding on. The whiskey burned, but he didn't flinch. Sometimes he'd stare at the wall for hours. Other times, he'd look at his reflection in the cracked mirror and barely recognize the man looking back. In his mind, though, the past wasn't quiet. It shouted. It came in flashes that struck without warning. His wife, Eliza, laughing in the morning light, brushing her hair in long strokes that reached her waist. She'd hum little tunes under her breath while folding clothes or baking bread. When she found out she was pregnant, her eyes had filled with tears, but her smile never faded. Then the memory shifted. Pain, blood, the midwife yelling for towels, Eliza's hand clutching his for dear life. Then nothing. No more songs, no more mornings. Only the baby, wailing and alone. Days passed in slow silence. One afternoon, while Josiah leaned against a post outside the saloon, he saw her again. The woman, the one who had taken the baby. She moved carefully, not in a rush like the others. She wore a plain blue dress and carried a woven basket. Her scarf was tied snug around her head, and her eyes scanned the street with calm. Someone near him muttered, "That's May Bell. Lives by the creek." Quiet sort. Josiah didn't respond. His eyes stayed on her as she walked away, her steps steady, the sun touching the edges of her shawl. He didn't plan to follow her. But the next day, he found himself outside town, trailing behind her on the road past the dry fields. She didn't look back. Her walk was slow but sure. A little white house stood in the trees near the bend. She went inside, and he stood at the edge of the trees, hidden. There was a window near the front. A soft lamp flickered to life. He moved closer, careful not to snap a twig or rustle leaves. Then he saw her, Maybelle, and in her arms, wrapped tight in a handmade quilt, was the baby. His baby. She held the child gently, brushing her hair with calm hands. The baby's eyes blinked up at her. She smiled. Something, then rocked her slowly back and forth. He turned away, heart pounding. It didn't feel like anger. It didn't even feel like grief. Just something hollow, deep, and aching, like the sound of boots in an empty house. Before he could step away from the trees, a hand grabbed his arm. Josiah. He turned fast. Sheriff Dunley stood there, rough and tall, a man used to dealing with trouble. You follow her again, we're going to have trouble. Josiah opened his mouth, but no words came. I know what happened, the sheriff said, voice low. Folks talk. I don't know why she took the baby, and maybe I don't want to. But that woman's been through enough. Let her be. Josiah gave a stiff nod. He didn't argue. He just walked away, hands deep in his coat, head low. He didn't go back to the saloon. That room was too close to people, too full of whispers. Instead, he asked the stable boy if he could sleep in the hay for a while. The boy shrugged. Suit yourself. So he stayed there, behind the horses, under the roof that creaked with the wind, curled up in a blanket that smelled of sweat and leather. He didn't need comfort. He just needed space. Every night, he lay on his back, staring at the wooden beams above. The questions never stopped. Why did he hand a baby over so easily? Why didn't he fight for her? Why did Maybelle take her without a word? The memory of her voice haunted him. Just 4 words. She's mine now. They weren't said in anger, not in warning, just final, soft, like someone who already knew something he didn't. He saw Maybelle again twice. Once at the general store, once by the river. Each time, she looked calm, steady, like a woman who had known hardship but chose to keep going. She never looked at him, but she always held the baby close. And Josiah, every time, stopped in his tracks. Part of him wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand something, anything. But he never did, because deep down, he wasn't sure if he deserved answers. He wasn't sure if he wanted them. The gate creaked louder than he remembered. Josiah Blackwell rode into the ranch yard without looking around. His horse moved slow, tired just like him. The house stood waiting, still and cold, like a place that had stopped breathing. The late sun fell over the roof, casting long, sad shadows across the porch. Josiah slid from the saddle without a word. Dust rose under his boots as he led the horse to the stable. He didn't even brush him down, just unstrapped the saddle, dropped it outside the stall, and let the animal wander. Then he walked back toward the house, eyes hollow. He paused on the porch. The door was still slightly ajar, just as he had left it weeks ago. A bird's nest had formed in the eaves. The doorknob felt cold, stiff. When he opened it, the smell hit him. Not a foul one, just dry wood, stale air, and the fading scent of the life they'd once shared. Inside, nothing had moved. His boots left marks in the dust as he stepped into the room. The crib stood in the far corner. Empty, not even a crease in the blanket. A single toy, a tiny wooden lamb Eliza had bought, sat inside, untouched. He walked to the bedroom, opened the closet. Her dress was still there, the soft blue one with little white flowers. She wore it often on calm days, especially when she sat reading on the porch or humming while peeling apples. His hand touched the fabric gently. He took it off the hanger and carried it to the front door. Quietly, he hooked it on the inside knob, just where she used to leave it, swaying gently with the breeze whenever she stepped outside. Then he walked to the table, sat down, and stared at nothing. He didn't speak for days. Not one word. He moved like a ghost. Woke with the sun, did the chores without thinking, then sat again. The animals still needed feeding, the fences still needed fixing. But each task was a blur. His body moved, but his mind stayed far behind. When he slept, he saw her. Sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming, sometimes just looking at him, eyes wide, confused like she didn't understand why she had to go. He woke with sweat on his brow, fists clenched, but the silence always greeted him like an old enemy. Autumn crept in. The trees along the fence line turned red and orange. The wind blew colder. Josiah started chopping more wood, stacking it high. He kept his hands busy. Idle hands made the ghosts come faster. One day, while looking through the old barn for rope, he found a small box under a tarp. Inside was his carving knife, the one Eliza gave him their second year married. He hadn't touched it in a long time. The handle still had the soft curve from years of use. That night, after supper, he sat near the fire and pulled out a block of wood, just a piece of soft pine. He hadn't carved in so long, his fingers felt stiff. Still, they remembered the movements. Slow, careful strokes. Quiet patience. He carved a rabbit first, then a fox, then a little dog. They weren't perfect, but something about the shapes gave him a small warmth. Like he was doing something that made sense again. Something that wasn't just surviving. He kept carving night after night. It became his routine. Fix fences by day, carve by night. He lined the finished animals along the windowsill. Each one smooth, sanded, and painted with what little color Eliza had left behind. One week, a cold rain came through. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, but Josiah stayed by the fire, carving. That night, for no reason he could name, he picked up a smaller block of wood than usual. He carved slowly. His knife moved with care, not skill. He didn't plan what it would be, but as the shape formed, he saw it. A tiny horse. Not just any horse. It looked like the ones babies ride in their dreams. Big eyes, soft body, one hoof raised. When he finished, he sat staring at it. It felt too small for his hands, like it was meant for someone else. Someone with fingers the size of flower petals. He pulled out Eliza's old sewing box. Tucked beneath the thimbles and pins was her paintbrush. He mixed a soft yellow from the leftover paints. It reminded him of warm mornings and her favorite apron. When the paint dried, he lifted the little horse and held it in his palm. And he broke. He didn't even feel it coming. One breath, then another. Then his chest tightened and tears fell down his face before he knew it. He didn't sob. He didn't scream. He just cried like a man who had tried too long not to. Tears dropped onto the wooden floor, onto the fire-warmed rug, onto the tiny horse. His shoulders shook. His hands trembled. It was the first time he'd wept since the moment Eliza died. Since the moment he placed the baby in Maybelle's arms. He remembered the weight of the child in his hands, the silence around them, her tiny face, his numb heart, and her words. She's mine now. Why'd he let her go? Why'd he walked away? What kind of man gives up his child and rides home to sleep alone? He didn't have answers. He only had this pain, this guilt, this silence. But now it was out. He sat there until the fire burned low, holding that little yellow horse, letting his body feel what his heart had been holding back for weeks. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, for the first time, Josiah began to mourn. Josiah started going to town again. Not often, just every few weeks. He'd ride in slow, tie his horse near the post office, and stand around like a man with nowhere to be. He never stayed long, never talked much. Mostly, he just watched. He watched from distance. He didn't go near the church steps or the general store porch. He didn't walk past the saloon. He stood in the shade near the old well, quiet, still. His eyes always searched for the same thing. Maybelle. She didn't know he was watching. He made sure of it. She came to town sometimes, carrying a cloth basket on one hip and the baby girl on the other. She always looked calm, even tired, but there was warmth in her steps. Like her days were full and her hands never truly empty. One Sunday, the church hosted a picnic in the field behind it. The air was soft and warm. Josiah stayed behind the trees, close enough to see, but far enough to be unseen. Maybelle sat on a quilt with other women, laughing gently, brushing crumbs from the baby's chin. The girl was bigger now, hair starting to curl, legs kicking strong. Maybelle fed her tiny bites of biscuit, then kissed her forehead with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times before. The baby, his daughter, reached for her face and giggled. Then, clear and bright, the girl said her first word. Mama. Josiah's heart stopped. She didn't look toward him. She didn't even know he was there. She reached her arms up toward Maybelle, smiling wide, proud of herself. Mama. The word rang in Josiah's ears like a bell in an empty canyon. Not for him. Not Papa. Not Dada. Just Mama. For someone else. He turned away. walked back to his horse, slow and quiet. He didn't ride hard, just made his way home through the dry brush and fading sun, head down. That night, the ranch was even quieter. He lit the fire, ate a cold biscuit, then stared at the wooden animals lined up on the windowsill. His eyes landed on the little yellow horse. It was meant for the baby. He held it for a long time, then wrapped it in a cloth square. No note, no ribbon, just the carving, the paint a little chipped on the ear. The next morning, before town woke, he left it at her door, set it down gently, knocked once, and walked away. No one saw him, or if they did, no one called out. He didn't go back the next week. But the week after, he rode into town again, stood near the blacksmith's shed, and glanced down the lane toward her small cottage. The window was open. A soft breeze moved the curtain, and hanging there, inside the baby's room, was the little yellow horse. She had kept it. She had hung it in the window for the world to see. Josiah didn't smile, but something in his chest softened like a tight, not letting go. He didn't feel jealousy, not anger either. What he felt was strange and quiet, like standing on a hill at dusk, watching the last light fade and knowing you can't chase it. Longing. He didn't want to take the baby back. He couldn't raise her. Not now. Maybe not ever. But he wanted to be near somehow. Not to own, not to claim, just to be part of the world where she lived. He started noticing little things around the ranch. The dust on the porch boards, the weeds growing along the walkway, the broken shutter hanging loose above the kitchen window. That week, he fixed the shutter. He swept the porch. He pulled the weeds. It didn't change much, but made the house feel less forgotten. The next week, he planted flowers. He found Eliza's seed box in the pantry, tucked behind old tins. She'd always wanted color by the door. Yellow marigolds, purple asters, pale white daisies. He knelt in the dirt and pressed the seeds into the soil with careful fingers. His hands were rough, but the touch was gentle, like planting memory, like asking forgiveness. The days moved slow, but something inside him had shifted. He still didn't speak much, still didn't smile, but he moved with purpose again, fed the animals on time, brushed down the horse each evening, washed the dishes instead of letting them sit. Sometimes, after chores, he carved. He made another fox, then a bird, then a lamb. He didn't plan to give them away, but he liked making them. It felt like talking in a language no one else needed to hear. Some nights, he stood outside, looking up at the stars. The sky always looked bigger when the land was quiet. He wondered if the baby ever looked up at it too. If Maybelle told her stories. If she'd grow up thinking of herself as someone lucky, someone chosen, not someone left behind. That thought both hurt and healed. He had given her up. That was true. But maybe, just maybe, he had also given her something better. And somehow, knowing the little yellow horse sat in her window, that she saw it every day, that was enough for now. For the first time in a long time, Josiah felt like he wasn't entirely gone from the world. The days had grown hotter. Dry winds swept across the town, and folks started speaking in low, worried voices. First at the saloon, then outside the church, and finally in front of the general store, a fever was going around. They said it was hitting the little ones hardest. No one knew where it came from, but it moved fast. Took some in a day. Others lasted 3, maybe 4 before slipping away. Josiah heard the talk when he came into town for seed. 2 mothers were crying outside the apothecary. A preacher offered water to a man with a sick boy across his shoulder. The blacksmith hammered quieter than usual, the echo of iron not as sharp. And then he heard a name. Maybelle. Someone whispered it behind him. Said her baby girl had fallen sick. High fever. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't cry. Just burned up in her arms like a coal too hot to touch. Josiah didn't wait. He dropped the sack of seed right there in the dirt and mounted his horse. He rode fast, faster than he'd ridden in years. Dust kicked up behind him like smoke. His hat nearly flew off. His heart pounded, not just from the speed, but from fear he couldn't speak. When he reached Maybelle's small house, the front door was cracked open. The curtains didn't sway. The porch was quiet. No laughter. No baby's babble. Just stillness. He stepped inside without knocking. She was there, on the floor beside a low cot. The child lay limp on a folded quilt, her small chest rising too quick, too shallow. Her skin was flushed deep red. Damp curls stuck to her forehead. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her little hand twitched weakly in her sleep. Maybelle looked up. She didn't shout, didn't send him away. Their eyes met, his wild with panic, hers exhausted and scared. No words passed between them. She just reached for a bowl of water, handed him a cold rag, and nodded. Josiah knelt beside the cot and pressed the cloth gently to the girl's head. He didn't know if he was doing it right, but he kept doing it anyway. He dipped wrong pressed, again and again. His hand shook, but he stayed calm. He held the baby's hand and whispered old cowboy songs. Soft, simple ones his mother used to hum when storms came over the plains. He didn't know if the baby could hear him. He didn't care. He just kept whispering. Maybelle sat across from him, silent, watching. Time passed strangely. The fire in the hearth burned low. The night outside deepened. The baby stirred once, a little moan, then went quiet again. Josiah's knees ached. His back throbbed, but he didn't move. Somewhere near dawn, Maybelle finally spoke. "You didn't just give her away," she said quietly. Her voice was low, hoarse. "You gave her to me." Josiah looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't blaming. She was just saying it like a truth that lived in her chest now, same as her heartbeat. He nodded barely, swallowed hard. They didn't speak again for a while. The room stayed warm from the dying fire. The baby's breathing slowed, deepened. Color started to return to her cheeks. Her fingers curled around Josiah's thumb. When the sun finally rose, soft and pale through the window, the fever had broken. The baby slept peaceful now, cool to the touch, skin no longer burning. Josiah leaned back against the wall, relief pouring through him like rain. His whole body sagged. Maybelle reached for the baby, cradled her gently, then lay down beside her on the floor. Josiah didn't move. He stayed right there beside them, the three of them huddled near the hearth, too tired to speak, too grateful to sleep. And for the first time since Eliza died, Josiah didn't feel like a man alone. He felt part of something again. He closed his eyes, and the three of them, the cowboy, the woman, and the child once given away, slept side by side in the quiet warmth of morning. The sun had barely risen over the hills when Josiah stepped out of the small house. The sky was soft and pale, the kind of morning where the world still held its breath. Dew clung to the porch rail. Inside, the baby slept by the hearth, her cheeks pink with warmth, no sign of the fever that once burned through her. He stood there, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, staring at the dirt road ahead. It had been days since he rushed back to town. Days since Maybelle had opened the door, handed him a cold rag without a word, and let him stay through the long, terrifying night. He hadn't meant to stay this long, but he hadn't left either. At first, he did small things. Drew water from the well, chopped firewood, repaired a loose hinge on the back gate. Maybelle didn't stop him, didn't ask questions. She simply moved through the house with the baby on her hip, quiet as ever, as if Josiah had always been part of the walls. There was something peaceful about the silence between them, not cold, not tense, just honest, like two people too tired to pretend. But the words still lived inside him, heavy, waiting. That morning, he sat down on the porch steps, held his hat in his hands. His boots were caked in dry mud, but he didn't bother brushing them off. The sun warmed the boards beneath him. A few minutes later, Maybelle stepped outside with 2 cups of coffee. She offered him one without a word, then sat beside him. They sipped slowly, birds chirping somewhere in the tall grass. Josiah stared straight ahead. Then, after a long silence, he spoke. "I thought if I let her go," he said softly, "I wouldn't have to love her." Maybelle didn't look at him, didn't flinch. She just listened. His voice was low, rough like the sound of gravel under a boot. "I held her for the first time, and all I saw was Eliza. My wife. Her face. her hair, her hands. And then I realized Eliza was gone, but the baby was still there, and I didn't know how to hold her without breaking. He swallowed. The words came slower now. Everything in me was screaming, not because I didn't want the baby, but because I didn't know if I could survive loving her. Not after losing Eliza. He looked down at his hands, big and calloused. So, I gave her to you, he said, and I walked away like a coward. Maybelle didn't speak right away. The wind moved the tall grass beyond the fence. She held her coffee close, steam curling past her chin. I buried a child once, she said, her voice steady. A little girl, not even a year old. The fever came quick, took her fast. Josiah looked over at her, surprised. I was young. No husband, no family, just me and her. And then just me. She set her coffee down gently on the step. I stopped talking for weeks after she died, she said. Stopped smiling. I didn't hold another baby for years. Couldn't. The pain in her words was deep, quiet. The kind that had sat inside her for a long time. When you handed me that little girl, she said, looking at him now, I didn't know what to do. My arms knew how to hold her, but my heart, she paused, placing a hand gently on her chest. My heart broke all over again. But you didn't say no, Josiah said quietly. No, she replied, because even through the pain, something in me hoped. She turned her head and watched the sun peak over the far ridge. I thought maybe God was giving me another chance, not to fix what happened, but to hold love again. They sat together in stillness, the quiet now full of shared hurt and fragile truths. Josiah turned his cup slowly in his hands, then looked at her. Did you ever think of giving her back? He asked, voice almost a whisper. Maybelle turned to him fully. Her eyes, dark and steady, didn't waver. No, she said. Simple, certain. Josiah held her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like the world wasn't spinning without him. After a long pause, he nodded. Neither do I. The baby made a soft sound from inside, a sleepy little sigh, then a giggle. Josiah stood, walked to the door, and looked in. She sat up in her blanket, blinking in the morning light. Her tiny fingers reached toward him. He stepped inside slowly, crouched down beside her. She giggled again and reached both hands out, one to him, one to Maybelle, who had followed quietly behind. They both kneeled now, on either side of her. And for the first time since Eliza died, Josiah smiled, a real, tired, aching smile. The baby's laugh echoed through the small home like music. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. There were three hearts, broken, mending, healing. Together, Josiah stood at the edge of the field, hands in his pockets, watching the wind move through the tall grass. It had been months since the night he held Ellie's fevered body beside Maybelle's hearth. Months since her small fingers gripped his thumb and wouldn't let go. The days had gotten warmer. Rain softened the roads. Wildflowers popped up near the fence lines. But inside Josiah, something stayed the same, a quiet ache, a longing to belong again. He had stopped sleeping in the stable, moved back into his house, little by little, cleaned the floors, scrubbed the soot from the hearth, fixed the broken back door. But it wasn't for him. Every nail he hammered, every board he straightened, he did for someone who hadn't asked, someone he wasn't sure he had a right to claim. One morning, before the sun rose, he saddled his horse and rode into town. The trading post owner nodded at him. You look like a man who's got something on his chest. I suppose I do, Josiah said. He didn't go to Maybelle's house right away. Instead, he passed the church, the schoolyard, the small houses where people hung laundry and tended to chickens. He noticed things now. Children laughing, a father tossing a little boy into the air, a girl clinging to her mother's skirts. Things he used to let blur past. He stopped by the blacksmith's to offer help, then swept the saloon steps, helped carry flour sacks for the grocer. Maybelle saw him once across the square. Their eyes met. She gave a small nod. No smile, no frown, just something unreadable. That night, he worked in his small shed. The lantern flickered above his head as he sanded the final edge of the wooden rocking horse. He'd carved it by hand. Strong legs, soft curves, a painted saddle. Yellow again. The same shade as the tiny wooden horse he'd left on her porch months ago. Before sunrise, he walked the long road to Maybelle's. Noah was awake. The porch creaked as he stepped up. He placed the rocking horse beside the door and walked away. He didn't expect a note. Didn't wait for thanks. But the next time he passed her house, 2 days later, the rocking horse was gone from the porch. That evening, when he peeked through the edge of the window, he saw it, inside beside the hearth, with a small blanket draped over its back. He breathed deep. The tightness in his chest loosened just a little. He kept coming into town. Not every day, not always near her, but he stayed close. Took odd jobs. Repaired a fence here, stacked firewood there. He didn't ask to see the child. Didn't push. He let time move. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon at the schoolhouse gathering, Ellie ran out from behind the crowd, her hair in a crooked braid, her cheeks flushed. She ran straight to Josiah, arms wide. "Joe," she shouted. He froze. Time stopped for a beat. She crashed into his legs, hugged him tight. He looked down at her, stunned, speechless. "Joe," she said again, smiling up at him. That was the name she'd made for him. Small, soft, her own. Behind her, Maybelle stood watching, arms folded but not in anger. She looked tired but calm. Josiah bent down, brushing Ellie's hair from her eyes. "Hello, little one." She grinned and pulled a small flower from her pocket. "For you," she said. He took it in both hands, like it was the rarest thing in the world. "Thank you kindly." Later that week, he saw Maybelle outside the schoolhouse again. He didn't speak at first, just tipped his hat. She came closer, hands tucked in her apron. "She's gotten fond of you," she said. "I noticed," Josiah replied. "She asks about you. Wonders if you're coming to town each week." "I like to keep coming," he said. Maybelle looked at him for a long while. Her face unreadable, eyes steady. "You didn't just leave her with me that day. You left yourself behind, too." Josiah looked down. "I thought if I let her go, I wouldn't have to love her. But I do. I always have." "I know," she said, almost a whisper. The next morning, Josiah woke before dawn. He saddled his horse, rode to her cabin, and stood outside the porch. When she opened the door, he took off his hat and held it to his chest. "Maybelle," he began, voice low, "I don't want to take her from you. I wouldn't. But I wonder if I might help raise her. Not as a ghost. Not from the shadows. As myself." Maybelle stepped onto the porch. The morning was still. Birds just beginning to sing. "You mean as her father?" she asked. Josiah nodded. "If you'll let me." She didn't answer right away. Looked down the road, then up at the sky. "I'm afraid," she said finally. "I know. I'm afraid you'll take her and go." "I won't," he said. "I wouldn't." She nodded slowly. "Let me think on it." That evening, Josiah didn't ride home. He sat by the creek near her land, carving another piece of wood. This time a small bird, wings spread. He didn't know why. Maybe just to keep his hands busy. A week passed, then another. Still no word. Then one day, he was mending a fence post near the town church when a small voice called out, "Joe." Ellie came running, arms flapping, Maybelle just behind her. He crouched down. "Hi there, Ellie." She threw her arms around his neck. "Mama said I can ride the big horse with you next Sunday." He looked up at Maybelle. Her eyes were soft this time. She stepped closer. "If you'd like," she said, "you could join us for supper. Tonight." He felt a weight lift off his chest. "I'd be honored." That night, they ate stew by the fire. Ellie showed him her drawings. Maybelle told him about the time Ellie tried to bathe a chicken. They laughed. Quiet laughter, but real. After the meal, Ellie fell asleep on the rug, clutching a cloth doll. Josiah helped Maybelle wash the dishes. As he dried a plate, he glanced at her. "Did you ever think, after all this, that we might raise her together?" Maybelle set the plate down. Her fingers brushed his, just for a second. "She can have 2 parents," she said softly, "if we choose to stay." They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the wind outside. Weeks passed. Josiah built a small shed beside his old cabin, then a new chicken coop. Maybelle and Ellie visited on Sundays. He taught Ellie how to lead a horse by the reins. She laughed every time it snorted. One morning, as the sun came up over the hills, the three of them walked down the dusty road together. Ellie skipped between them, holding a hand in each of hers. They weren't quite a family yet, but they weren't strangers anymore either. They were something new, something they hadn't been before. And for the first time in a long time, Josiah believed that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning was soft, the sky just waking with pale orange and quiet blue. Josiah stood outside Maybelle's cabin, sleeves rolled up, sawdust on his hands. The wooden frame of the nursery stood behind him, half finished, but already full of hope. He had started building it without asking. Maybelle didn't stop him. One day, she walked outside with a jug of lemonade and 2 tin cups. She handed him one without a word and sat on the steps beside him. From that day on, she helped him measure the planks, steady the ladder, and sweep the shavings away. They worked in calm silence, sometimes talking, sometimes not. The addition slowly took shape. Not just wooden nails, but a promise. A space meant for new beginnings. They didn't call it Ellie's room. They called it the nursery. Like it belonged to something bigger than just one child. Like it was a room where healing could happen, where memories could settle without pain. One afternoon, as Josiah hammered in the last window latch, Maybelle stood in the doorway holding Ellie. The toddler squirmed in her arms, eager to explore. Josiah stepped back, nodding toward the fresh floorboards. "You want to see, little one?" Ellie giggled and wriggled free, toddling into the nursery with wide eyes and small feet that thudded softly on the wood. She touched the walls with both palms and plopped down in the middle, babbling nonsense that only made sense to her. Maybelle leaned against the doorframe, a soft smile playing at the corner of her lips. Josiah looked at her, then back at Ellie, and something in his chest settled, like a long sigh after years of holding breath. That evening, they planted sunflowers along the cabin side. The soil was warm under their fingers. Maybelle dug the holes while Josiah placed the seeds, and Ellie toddled between them, dragging a small tin watering can and dumping water in random spots. Sometimes she got the plants, sometimes just her shoes. They didn't mind. They laughed, real laughter that felt new and old all at once. As the sun dipped low, the shadows of the three of them stretched out across the dirt, touching the fence and curling toward the nursery. That night, when Ellie was asleep, Josiah stepped outside. The stars blinked above like soft embers. He walked the long path to the small graveyard that lay behind a broken fence line, where the grass grew a little taller and the wind always whispered low. He found her stone easily. It was simple, just her name and the date that split his life in two. He knelt and placed something beside the marker, a small wooden flower carved by his hands. The petals were smooth, curved gently like the real ones she used to pick. "I should have come sooner," he whispered, "but I didn't know how." He looked up at the stars, then back at the grave. "She's safe now. She's loved, and she's ours. I hope. I hope you see her in the sunshine." He sat there a while, letting the wind brush over him. For the first time, the grave didn't feel heavy. It felt quiet, like something had been laid to rest. Not just her body, but his guilt too. The next morning, he found Ellie running barefoot through the grass, arms flapping like wings. Her curls bounced with each step, and she squealed as a butterfly danced just ahead of her. "Joe!" she shouted, laughing. "Joe!" Josiah stood from the porch and opened his arms. She crashed into his legs, hugging them tight, before he lifted her high and spun her once in the air. Her laughter rang through the field like wind chimes. Maybelle stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She watched them quietly, her heart fuller than it had been in years. When Josiah looked at her, he didn't have to say anything. She already knew. He set Ellie down, and together, the three of them walked back to the porch. They sat side by side, Ellie in the middle, her small hands in theirs. The porch creaked under their weight, and the setting sun poured golden light across the land, soft and forgiving. The rocking horse sat nearby, its paint faded from use, its saddle worn smooth. A breeze stirred the sunflowers. Somewhere, a bird sang its evening song. They sat there in silence, letting the moment hold them, not rushing, not speaking, just being. In that golden hour, time slowed down. There was no yesterday, no tomorrow, just now. And maybe Josiah thought that was enough. Maybe this, the porch, the child, the woman beside him, was the home he'd been searching for all along. He looked down at Ellie, her small head resting against Maybelle's arm. Then up at the sky, now brushed with rose and gold. In his heart, he whispered what he could never quite say aloud. I didn't give her away. I gave her the best I had left.